Acton in Focus is brought to you by Kitchen Outfitters.
Welcome to Acton in Focus. I'm Vivian Kusinja Birchall, your host, and my special guests today are Madeline and Chris, who I will ask to introduce yourselves. Welcome to the show, Madeline and Chris.
Thank you, Vivian, for allowing us to be in the space today. My name is Madeline Cruz. I am an Acton resident since practically 2005. I reside here with my 3 children and boyfriend, and I am a member, volunteer, sometimes leader of Housing and Justice and Climate Justice for Acton.
Thank you so much for having us here. My name is Christopher Lopez. I've lived here for about a year now, and I'm a renter at Dover Heights, and I am a member volunteer of Housing Climate Justice for Acton. I also act as a leader at some points, and I also act as event planning.
Awesome. So again, we welcome you to ActonTV and to Acton in Focus, since this is the first time you're my guests on this show. And what inspired the writing of this report?
Truly what inspired the writing of the report is to keep our focus on getting the select board to add a renters advocate for their goal setting for next year. We needed something that collaborated with all our work that we've done, especially during the last year, collecting information, canvassing, and we happen to have a social worker as a member, and she articulated the report with all the work that we've inputted, especially during the last year because it started the year before. And she broke everything down, and she did a well job. She unfortunately couldn't be here today because she has work commitment, but it was her who worked to input the information together so that we would actually have it to give it to the select board and say, you know, these are our findings, and we're hoping that they hear us out because renters need to be backed up in the town of Acton. We need the support of the government here in Acton to stop what is happening to us and, you know, be more inclusive in town government and town events itself.
Yeah, so you mentioned we when you're talking about the writing of the report or putting it together. Who is we?
We are a group of renters, and we do have some homeowners and condo owners that are part of Housing and Climate Justice for Acton. It started off with a group called the Climate Mobilization and Climate Mobilization Project. They go into areas in the United States, certain towns or cities where they see, you know, basically like climate huge and climate making justice for climate. We're suffering. There's a crisis out there, and they were very interested in what Acton has already accomplished to make it more green, and that also triggered to incorporate housing issues because that's what they kind of do too. So they do a little bit of both, and they came out here. They met with a couple of people, and then they created the group. We just renamed the group not too long ago. I think it was like 6 months ago. We gave it a new name. And basically that's how we started.
And Chris, how did you come into this organization and space?
So, as I said, I came here about a year ago. And so that is kind of around when, I believe at the time it was climate mobilization. They had done canvassing, which we are pretty known for now, but canvassing back then was initially to kind of get the word out for the group. It kind of was the snowballing effect of creating a larger group that it is today. But it did start off as a small group prior to that. So for me, I was just moving in, and I knew in previous living situations, I've been a renter and I've experienced a lot of difficulties, and I've experienced a lot of great living situations. So I knew the stark difference of what is fair and what is not. And I knew in the current situation that I was in, I had moved in maybe a week and I was already dealing with things that were quite unfair. So it was definitely a big urge for me to join.
So which will take me back into the report, because the reason, from what I've heard, is there were concerns that the Housing and Climate Justice Group wanted to elevate and inform the public about. So what were some of the key findings from this report? And maybe before we go to the findings, you've talked about the canvassing. How did you select what places you canvassed, and how many places did you canvass in our community?
I'm not too sure what motivated that canvassing structure, like who, what places they decided. I think from my perspective, being in the group now for 6-7 months, is they chose places that where they knew renters lived the most, which is all along, Great Road area. And then you have the ones, like where I live, which is Yankee Village and Christover Heights. And the more members that you pick up, the more canvassing you do, you learn about, a friend of mine lives, half a mile down the street. It's a rental unit and they have this issue. And just people from the area that have supported us also know of a lot more areas that we don't. And that's how we've done the canvassing that we've done. We ask new members that come in if they're interested in it. If we have a specific target that we need to canvass, then we all round up and ask ourselves, what is it that we want? Do we want to do phone canvassing? Do we want to do door by door? Or do we want to do we did table canvassing at Donald's for the Warrant article that we presented. So it's really about just getting people to give them all this information and asking them, are you willing to do this? And do you mind doing it? When I started, I was a bit nervous, it's true, it's hard. Yes, I love talking and I love meeting new people. I come from a big city. I come from a big family, but it's something different when you are actually a renter yourself and you're experiencing the harshness that we face day by day. And then being a woman of color makes it even worse, because you're like, oh, well, it's not easy knocking on certain doors because you don't know who's going to come at you with a bat. But I broke that fear and I broke my silence, and I'm proud of myself and I'm comfortable in knowing that I am making a difference with my voice and helping others like me.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what is, I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to talk about some of the issues that, that were revealing, that the report revealed that you probably did not know. Mm-hmm. I'll start with you, Chris.
So there is quite a list, unfortunately.
That's okay.
I'll pick. So I think one of the biggest reoccurring issues is that there is a lot of apartments that are just very old buildings, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And I think something we've observed is that there are lacking resources for renters to either find the assistance, to get either the building inspected for things such as mold or infestations of any type. But I think overall, we've also seen that unfortunately some of the infrastructures in place for people to use, unfortunately also in themselves need some correction. Unfortunately, because it seems there's a bit of this undertone of bias that we as renters need to go through our landlords or the company that owns the properties. And because of that barrier, a lot of our property owners, unfortunately, once again, are people who they either don't know how to communicate, or the communication that is there is very minimal and sort of non-responsive and kind of puts you in a loop. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's unfortunately a mix of, there's a lot of things that need to be repaired, there's a lot of things that need to be upkeeped, these management companies aren't doing it, and us as renters have a harder time getting things fixed or finding the aid to get them fixed.
Madeline?
You know, one of my biggest findings canvassing was to know that I wasn't alone in not knowing what my rights were, which Housing and Climate Justice for Acton is working on teaching people this type of information that we lack. You know, there was a lot of properties that, you know, I canvassed where the hallways, the smell of the hallways literally like made me want to vomit because they're not being upkept, and that's just unsanitary and wrong. There was a lot of people that had plastic over their windows, and that's a safety violation within itself in my eyes. Like if there's a fire at 3 o'clock in the morning and they don't have proper visibility and they know exactly where that window is, how are they supposed to get out of the window if they have like 2 to 3 plastic bags covering the windows because of the cold coming in?
And that's Acton.
Yeah, and that's Acton, and it's sad that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge that there is this issue, but I'm also grateful that because of climate mobilization and climate mobilization project, it helped create what we are today, because we're bringing actual facts and focus to saying we need change. You know, I'm not doing this because I want to point a finger and ridicule what past landlords and past management companies have done. That's besides the point. You know, my thing is taking acknowledgement and then taking accountability and saying we have a problem and we need to fix it, because people shouldn't live this way. Housing is a human right and it shouldn't be denied to anyone. And the only way that we're going to end homelessness, and the only way that we're going to prevent a lot of the issues that have happened, if we create policies and put them in place, and bylaws and put them in place, and say enough is enough. You know, we have to take the responsibility. This is your building. You expect people to upkeep their apartments, yet you're not upkeeping the things that you should be doing by justifying and saying it's the tenant's fault. It's not the tenant's fault that there's mold because you neglected to put in a new roof 2 years ago. It's finding those infrastructures that create programs so that if a building owner is lacking the money to do what he needs or she needs to do, he could go or she could go and say, you know what, I desperately need to prevent homelessness because I can't afford to fix the roof. What can you guys do for me? Whether it's at a, you know, state level, local level, or federal level, but it's acknowledgement and it's taking accountability and finding a solution instead of putting it in the back burner and saying this doesn't exist.
So you mentioned policy, and I'm going to give, I guess, an opportunity to both of you to just share with us what are some of your visions, and maybe even what could have come out of this report as a recommendation that is policy related that you would want to see going forward. And I can start with you again, Chris, and then Madeline, if there's anything.
Ooh, policy. So I think one that we have talked about as a group, this is something that kind of reaches all renters, I believe. This is not just an Acton issue. This is a big statewide issue, and probably beyond that. But rent at the moment is a huge topic. While there are companies which, unfortunately in Acton, there's a lot of companies buying and selling, and there's a lot of rotation. There's never that steadiness. So with that also comes new leases and new agreements at times. Usually, by law, you do go by the lease that you had signed. But when you go to sign up for the next lease for the next time around, we've seen a lot of just big hikes in price. Now, I'm not saying this is necessarily the companies that are buying its fault if they're trying to do that like on purpose or whatever. It's just more the idea of this is more bigger than us, and we've talked about rent control on a state level and having, I believe if Madeline would like to correct me, it's one of our senators that has a bill in front of him, and I think that's kind of like again, talked about policy, and maybe that's bigger than policy, but I think that's one big key topic right now that we've, as a group, kind of confirmed that it's worth talking about and it's necessary, because beyond not being able to afford our current prices, if it just raises, at this point, we're just talking about people being homeless, and that's just an issue in itself that we should never be coming towards. And it's just sad that it's affecting a lot of us in that way. It really is. So I think that's one big thing we would like to see.
I do know that there is a rent control bill sitting somewhere. I'm not sure if it's at the governor's table, but I do know that Senator Eldridge supports this bill, and there's a lot of other senators who support the bill in Massachusetts, but we need to incorporate more to push this bill out so it's not forgotten. Another policy that I personally would like to see, and I'm not sure if it actually does exist in the town of Acton, I'm still working on finding answers to that, but I would like to see building inspections. Boston has inspection for buildings, I believe, every 5 years. I feel building inspections should not be just limited to new constructions. I feel that in order to keep people safe, to avoid what happened in Florida, I always go back to what happened in Florida, that issue could have been prevented. All those people's lives probably could have been saved if building inspectors would stay on top of inspecting these buildings, but also where there is no law that says you have to do this, then we need to place it and say, this is our new policy. We're going to start off with, these 5 buildings this year. Next year, we're going to start off with another 5 buildings, and we're going to rotate them every 5 years. And if, there's a building that has a violation, then, the owner is going to be responsible. They're going to get a fine, whether it's like, $100 or couple $100. It doesn't have to be like we're ripping people off, but we're trying to place policies that will hold people accountable for not taking care of their property, because it's not just tenants. There's good tenants, there's bad tenants, there's good landlords, bad landlords, and there's just the people that just don't know. And it's our job to teach them, and so it's our job to come up with a plan and teach each other, and then teach the ones that really need the teaching, and saying, this is unacceptable, this is what you need to do, or whatever the work is. But I believe having policies like that can prevent what a lot of people are hurting today. Not having adequate windows that insulate your apartment because there's cracks. That's something that we shouldn't wait on. So that when I talk about creating policies, that's what I mean.
So just for the interest of our viewers who don't know what happened in Florida, since you've made reference to it, could you kindly explain to us what happened very briefly?
Yes, there was a building in Florida that had a lot of faulty issues, cracked foundation, so many other things, and the building in the middle of the night, I forgot how many residents, and actually I forgot where exactly it is, but this building collapsed in the middle of the night, and a lot of people died, and that always sits in the back of my mind now, that since I started canvassing and I see the conditions of some of the properties here in Acton, and I'm like, how do we allow this? We shouldn't allow this. Something has to be done.
I just really wanted us to dig into the report that you have come up with. I have had the opportunity to look at it, but what is the key takeaway for us as residents of Acton? What do you want us to take away from this report? And maybe even before I give you the opportunity to say that, are there parts of the report that you would want the community to know about, and who have you shared it with so far?
So I would like the entire community of Acton. In order to make a community functional for all, we have to give the information to everyone and say, this is what our findings are, and this is how can we as a community, as a town, find a solution to this problem. So far, we've shared the report with the select board in hopes that they validate the suffering that so many tenants in this community have. You know, a lot of people work and have kids here and they go to school. You just never know who you might encounter at the grocery store that's bagging your groceries, that's a renter in Acton who's suffering, or so, someone who works at a school, whether it's a teacher, whether it's the lunch lady, or the janitor. You just never know who you bump into that is suffering in their unit because of negligence. And I think it's important that if we want to face the problem properly, we need to make this report accessible. So far, we've shared it with the select board in hopes that this targets them to say, hey, we do need to put this renters advocate in our goal setting because renters do need help,
And what is your strategy for sharing it with the rest of the community?
Well, this opportunity that you gave us today. Another one is once we talk a little bit more, I would like to share it, on social media and our Facebook page and our Facebook group and profile, and maybe having someone share the article in a newspaper would be my thought process. But it's not just one person's decision; it's all of us. We always incorporate everyone. Yeah.
Chris, do you have anything to add?
Ooh. So I think a big thing is to kind of answer two questions that you asked. Was, as this article, I think we're definitely hoping to share it on any platform that we can. We're trying to, I believe we will do, events as we do to try to get the community together. And I think a big thing is that we are trying to bring visibility to an issue that, for whatever reason at the moment, hasn't been taken serious enough. This report is basically our note to the town and to the residents that we are here. We collected our voices together, and we hope that it reaches out to you, whether you are a renter who also is experiencing something like this and you need the help and you need someone else to listen to your voice, because that's kind of been the common thing, is the feeling very voiceless. But we've come together to kind of support each other and to bring awareness to the very serious issue that seems to be ignored. And then to, the homeowners, I truly, truly want you all to understand just what we experience in Acton. Such a beautiful town, it can be such a wonderful place, but when I go to home, it doesn't feel that way. And that's what I would like to have. I would like to have that. And I think a lot of us renters do. And we want you to be part of that. And we have many, many members who are actually homeowners who support and help. And I think the biggest thing is that this report is to show that there's a need and it needs to be taken seriously. So we truly do hope that the town, the government, its residents can see that in this report, and that we can come together to solve this issue that should be so simply understood, but unfortunately it isn't. So that's why we made this report, I believe.
We are sponsored by another organization,
Right.
And in the future we would like to see us become our own individual organization.
Right.
But the main focus is always bringing awareness of issues renters face, and not just fighting the renter side, improvement on leases, conditions of apartment, creating policies on mold, or building and infrastructures like inspection, but also awareness and teaching. A lot of people don't know that they have rights, and it's important that we do that. In order to stop the madness that is happening with homeless today, we have to talk about it, acknowledge it, and then teach future generations. Like I have 3 children, and I talk to my 3 children about what I face. You know, there's a lot in my personal life that if I would have been taught, it would have been prevented with my experience living here in Acton as a renter and the things that I have faced. So again, it's not just bringing awareness that this is what renters need. It's making, how can we make it better for all of us, not just, you know, at a housing level, but at a climate level.
That's
also.
what, yeah. Well, it's
You know,
interesting you
to
mentioned that
me,
because that was going to be my next segue
Yes.
into, you know, the climate part of this conversation. What are some of the key issues, and this is probably going to be one of the last questions I ask, that are climate related that renters face, or that, you know, the disparities in you know, trying to address the climate crisis, but for renters?
So a lot of people who are renters usually don't have the same accessibility to certain things like recycling. It's something that we brought to the attention, and now they're working on it. Not all condo places and where, you know, rental dwellers live have the correct recycling structures, so that if I want to save all my boxes and recycle as a renter, I might not have that dumpster at where I live to do that. And that's the responsibility again of the owner and the town to really say, you know, this is a focus now, this is a policy now, you have to get a bin for recycling, because renters don't have the same flexibility to do that. Yes, I know that you could go to the transportation and you could buy a ticket, but let's face it, do we really want every single renter going to the transportation and bombarding the transportation workers? No, it's easier to just have a dumpster at these locations for people to recycle. Another thing that I would like to see is composition. Like I was reading an article the other day in New York. There's this young gentleman that lives in the projects, and he started a compost garden in the projects in New York. And I would like to see that here, where renters have that flexibility of, you know, saving their food, and, you know, instead of throwing it in the garbage, we use this as a resource. You know, that's one of the things that our warrant article did, was about the electrical vehicle charging stations. And I'm happy that it passed, and I'm looking forward to collaborating more with town officials and how we could present this to building owners so that they could start doing it, because that's going to be our future. So if this bill, or if this warrant article passed, it's non-binding, why not do something now about it instead of waiting till 2030 and you know, beyond years when
Right.
everybody's going to be cramming? Like, why not start now?
Yeah, and I'm a little curious about when we're talking about, again, fighting against the climate crisis. One of the things that renters have no control over is what appliances we find in a rental unit. Has that conversation come up in your work? And
It has,
and
definitely.
I'm just curious, what have been some of the conversations like?
You know, from my personal experience, is how can we get the state or local government or even federal government to give more money to buy appropriate appliance? I feel that a lot of these appliances are bought because of the price, and they're cheap, and then they break down, and, you know, it becomes the tenant's fault, or it's not energy sufficient the way it says. And you know, just getting all those infrastructures that are going to help building owners or you know, unit owners to buy appropriate appliances that they're energy saving and efficient. To me, that's a big plus. Also, like, I would like to see solar panels installed in multi-building units. I know that I'm a big thinker, and a lot of people are like, this girl's crazy, she's talking, you know, out of her ears. But you know what? Knowledge is key. And if I know that it exists and the potential that it could be used, to me, it's huge. Why do we keep procrastinating? You can't make, my thing is, you can't make a town greener if you're not making it all green. You know, if homeowners have solar panels, because we all know that they help in saving, the burning of fossil fuels, then why not incorporate the same technique in buildings where multi-families live? That to me is important. Like, again, like the solar panels, the electrical vehicle charging stations, the compost of garbage, recycling, all that stuff. Again, if you want to make it truly green, you have to incorporate renters in all these buildings. You can't just do it from one aspect and not the other.
Awesome. Chris, you want to add something to that?
Madeline does a great job covering everything.
I'm sure there's at least something there.
Just one more.
Yeah.
One more. Gardening.
Of course. I think something I just want to bring up is that as a group that works on renters issues primarily, but we are a climate action type group as well. When we talk about our climate focus, we definitely try to keep a lens of, as a renter, how does it affect them? And I think the biggest question that always comes up is price. I think a lot of our focus, especially when it comes to things like solar panel, things that can save on price of energy, that could be efficient for the renters themselves so that it can, decrease prices. Because again, we're talking again about there's an issue with prices being high these days, not just for, renting, but it's also like on a global scale for just everything else right now. So I think a big thing, yes, I think upon like solar panels or something, it is also just insulation, making sure that they have proper insulation, especially with windows, so that, again, there's no leaking of these energies of that it's, I think in that level as well, we try to focus, because if it can help out the renters in that type of way of saving them money, keeping them safe, and also contributing to the entire goal of keeping everyone in this mindset of keeping green and staying green and getting even greener, these are the things that we should focus on.
And in your conversations, again, out of curiosity, have you had moments or conversations around the fear or the cost of retrofitting certain buildings to meet the clean energy standards versus the rent that might, the catalytic potential rent increase? And what has been that kind of conversation? What has come out of it?
So I know that one of the things that's always a concern, and my thing is, when you really use the knowledge and the power that's out there that offer, people the help to update, to make it more greener, more efficient in energy, is teaching and helping building owners accomplish those goals by helping them look for these
Rebates and
correct. And I think that without that, it is not doable. I also, want to point out that if you have a building that has 40 units and you have some of the owners own those units and then others are renters, condo association fees get involved. How are you, the same way you want renters to learn about budgeting, and you want renters to acknowledge that they need to change maybe certain bills so that they could fit whatever the need is, they need to do the same thing too. Do you, I'm not trying to be rude, but do you really need 20 trips to Bermuda in 1 year? No. I mean, if you have, it's ending that greed. I feel that I'm not saying it's particular just to Acton, but I feel that in our country it's just this greed that needs to end. And the only way that we're going to end it is by making sure we have these policies and infrastructures in place. And there are grants and there are, all these other potential organizations out there that can help solve this problem so that we don't have a huge increase in rent for some renters. You know,
Right.
I feel that that's important too.
Right. So, I mean, what I'm hearing is there's need to collaborate, there's need to actually focus.
Just because we have a group of renters fighting for equality and diversity and inclusion, I said that backwards, but anyways, just because we have that in place, it doesn't mean that we want to start a war. Like some people have that, and it's not about that. It's bringing justice equally to renters as homeowners have. It's feeling that belonging feeling. Like I didn't feel belonged in Acton for a long time until I spoke out about what's happened to me as an Acton resident, as a select board meeting, and then I started meeting other people in the community. I was always afraid of retaliation, and whether a lot of people like it or not, I still have that type of like, oh my God, if I say this, they're gonna wanna do this. And at the same time, I'm like, I broke that silence, I broke that fear, and I'm trying to help other people to do the same. I think that a lot of people just simply don't speak up because they are afraid to be retaliated, and I think that's unacceptable. We're bringing up valid points, valid concerns, because we want that inclusion and we want that belonging feeling. Like when I tell people that I live in Acton, I've always gotten negative comments like, why would you even live there with your family? Isn't that like a all white community? And I'm like, it actually has a lot of good points. Just because I personally have not felt that, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. I'm finding more about it now. So I want to be able to answer that question in the future by saying, actually, you're wrong. That was the past. Now there is a lot more positivity. There is diversity. There is, equity and inclusion. And I want to feel proud 100% when I say I live in Acton.
Yeah.
And I want others to feel that belonging too.
Right. And I think our town is moving, coming together.
It
There's
is.
so many
So
organizations.
props to us.
Yes, go Acton. I think we're in the right path. There are so many groups out there trying to do amazing work. There's a circle system by the Acton Boxborough United Way that is trying to facilitate, also provide spaces for people to talk about these complex issues in ways that are not that will make people feel safe to just talk about how the path forward for our town. And I think what you're doing, Renters and Climate Justice Group, is also forging a path forward for renters. And so together, I think as a community we can collaborate and make it the model town in the United States.
Yes.
And we have the will to do it. And
Yes,
with
I
that,
agree.
I really wanted to say thank you for the work you do for our community. Thank you for being here on my show. Before I say bye, is there any one final thing you want to tell our viewers? And if so?
The only thing that I want to tell people is that, never put someone down because you haven't lived an experience. Just because things work for you, it doesn't mean that it's working for everyone. We need to be responsible for the way we handle information by not pushing people away just because you didn't experience it. And then, I keep saying this over and over again, acknowledgement and accountability go a long way. And indeed, like I do feel that sense of belonging, and I'm very grateful for the people in this community, in this town, who have since come together to help the best way they can my family and I in the struggles that we've had, without making us feel guilty for it. And again, I think that we could be a great example for other communities in our country, because we are taking a step forward to acknowledge and hold people accountable and say we can make a difference. All voices together become powerful, become one. And I'm proud that this is the type of work that we're doing and exposure that we're getting, because it's very much needed. So thank you.
And Chris?
I would say, as Madeline has pointed out a couple of times, that education is a big thing. But I would say, as our group, we've coming on our year anniversary and such. Education is a huge thing for us as well. We, coming on our year anniversary and such. Education is a huge thing for us as well. We, coming on our year anniversary and such. Education is a huge thing for us as well. We, coming on our year anniversary and such. Education is a huge thing for us as well. We, coming on our year anniversary and such. Education is a huge thing for us as well. We, coming on our year anniversary and such. Education is a huge thing for us as well. We, coming on our year anniversary and such. Education is a huge thing for us as well. We, coming on our year anniversary and such. Education is a huge thing for us as well. We, coming on our year anniversary and such. Education is a huge thing for us as well. We, coming on our year anniversary and such. Education is a huge thing for us as well. We, coming on our year anniversary and such. Education is a huge thing for us as well. We, coming on our year anniversary and such. Education is a huge thing for us as well. We, coming on our year anniversary and such. Education is a huge thing for us as we're learning so much as we go. There's times where we change our minds on things, but I think the biggest thing is that we are excited about learning about the town, how it works, how we can work with it, how we can work with the community. And we're excited to share that with everyone else. And like Madeline has said before, sharing that information to renters about their rights, about information about programs that might be able to help. That's another big thing that this group really enjoys doing, because we get to learn as renters ourselves, because we're all renters in the group, the majority, but it's just helpful to all learn and grow together that way. It's awesome.
Right. So if somebody out in the community wants to be a part of your project, what's the contact that they can?
They can reach out to me. I'm easily found on Facebook. We do have a Facebook group called Housing and Climate Justice for Acton. And we are strict on who we let in the group, because we want the renters that are on there to feel safe also. So we do restrict the group, but we do have a Facebook page also called Housing and Climate Justice for Acton. We're working on Twitter, and we're working on Instagram. And we do have an email, which shame on me for not knowing it by heart yet. We do have a phone number that has a voicemail set up. And
thank you for being my guests on Acton in Focus, and for giving us information about the report. To our viewers, hope you have learned more about the Housing and Climate Action Climate Justice Group and what it does and some of the findings. And thank you for watching. Till next time.